Not long ago, in this very galaxy, just about everyone loved Star Wars, including me. Then Disney bought the franchise, and now, depending on who you ask, it's either evolving to be more inclusive and realize more of its potential, or it's being run into the ground by activists seeking to alienate and disparage its predominantly white, straight, male fan base, and even the creator himself, George Lucas. Of course, that was my feeble attempt at stating things in a more fair and matter-of-fact way. But if you want to know what I really think of shows like The Acolyte and other modern Star Wars productions, then stay tuned, because this is Moore's on Star Wars. I came to Star Wars in my late teens, when the original trilogy was refurbished and re-released theatrically in 1997. To be honest, A New Hope didn't do much for me at first, but Empire Strikes Back changed my tune, and I've been part of the toxic male fandom ever since. Now, I say toxic because even though I don't go on message boards complaining about how many untested women are becoming Jedi and being put in command in Disney era of the franchise, the rhetoric from the likes of Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy and showrunners like Leslie Headland and even Dave Filoni makes it clear that not only are they trying to diversify the franchise and its fans, but apparently straight white males simply are no longer welcome. At least, not unless they absolutely love everything that Lucasfilm does. For that matter, Headland has more or less implied that the original vision of creator George Lucas is flawed and also no longer welcome. Why? Well, I obviously cannot speak for her or anyone else at Lucasfilm or Disney with total accuracy, but in Headland's case, I think it's because Star Wars has always been a fairly broad allegory about the struggles between clear good and clear evil. And as a self proclaimed lesbian, I think Headland seems to equate those kinds of notions with the fundamentalist morality that has historically condemned her lifestyle and left her people unrepresented and, well, unwelcome in American pop culture. I have no problem with more women and diversity in Star Wars, and if it were only a matter of Disney Star Wars output not being so great, then at least we have the first six films, right? As it stands, this should all be organically weaved into the storytelling, the quality of which should be the top priority. Yet, depending upon where it comes from, I think too much criticism of things like story and character development in the movies and shows is being broadly characterized as hate speech directed towards the women and minorities involved. As I record this, Leslie Headland's series The Acolyte is 4 episodes into its run, with a critic score in the 80s and an audience score in the 20s on Rotten Tomatoes. Lucasfilm insists that this is a murder mystery, and Disney CEO Bob Iger insists that there is no political agenda either in Lucasfilm, Disney, or any of its subsidiaries. But showrunners have already suggested inherently political motivations behind how they crafted this show and others. And the acolyte itself has already dabbled in modernist insinuations, which liken the murderer to an oppressed minority and the Jedi to a belligerent and intolerant religious cult. Furthermore, the apparent focus of so much Disney content and its promotion on representation for its own sake seems to keep Disney and Lucasfilm from correcting the problems they voluntarily recognize are there. The reason is that while the diversity itself is not the problem, its prioritization over and before good and organic storytelling not only insults and alienates the core audience, but hurts the credibility of producers and showrunners and potentially threatens the probable goal of normalizing diversity and inclusion in the future. They're not just producing more diverse content. By their own alleged admission, they're appropriating someone else's intellectual property, hastily and unnaturally molding it to meet and fit their goals and preferences, then gaslighting its core audience with accusations of intolerance to deflect attention away from often valid criticism and cover for their increasingly poor quality of work. Even if the criticism has at times been too extreme or unwarranted, I think that recent reaction to said criticism has sent a clear message that those fans of George Lucas's Star Wars and its basic good versus evil allegory are being actively encouraged to relinquish their expectations. I would ask anyone prone to defending such actions to imagine what your reaction would have been if a male filmmaker had gotten hold of the Barbie movie and decided that it had appealed to young girls for too long and made a movie that parodied and belittled both the Barbie brand and the girls who like it. As it is, Barbie is an openly feminist movie, yet there are parts of it that still criticize the property and mock its alleged idea of feminine perfection. But the goal of that criticism isn't to fundamentally change the property, but to improve it. It's not to somehow purge the core fan base of its majority, but to draw them further in by addressing certain issues that many of those fans have probably had that were bound to have arisen as times changed between the 1950s and today. And though the Barbie movie is female centered, I think it ultimately treats even the more flawed male characters with fairness and understanding, giving them arcs of change instead of just using them as props or scapegoats to blame for all of the women's problems. Now, I stand by everything I just said, but I also want to be transparent and fair and prove that I'm not just repeating what I've heard from other YouTubers. Because personally, I don't hate the Acolyte the way a lot of other Star Wars fans seem to, which is why I'm mostly focused on addressing behind the scenes statements. It's more to the point to say that I'm not as offended personally by the Acolyte as many Star Wars fans seem to be. Besides the sometimes glaring issues with story structure and internal logic, a lot of the ire seems to stem from the depiction of Jedi as being predatory wolves in sheep's clothing. But while I agree that the show is a little too pointed in its critical characterization of Jedi, the fact is that George Lucas himself used the prequels to criticize the fictitious peacekeeping order of Force wielders. You could even argue that the rise of Darth Vader would not have been possible but for the blind arrogance and other flaws inherent in the Jedi and their beliefs and policies. At the end of the day, though, audience perceptions, while not always fair or accurate, are generally what translate into profitable brand loyalty or lack thereof. And by those metrics, neither Lucasfilm nor the Star Wars franchise is doing very well at the moment under Disney. In just the last year, Lucasfilm's first and allegedly most expensive Indiana Jones movie since 2008 was seemingly eclipsed at the box office by the $15 million indie film Sound of Freedom. In the experiential and immersive Star Cruiser Hotel at Disney's Orlando theme park saw an abrupt and ignominious end in September of 2023 after having only been open for around 18 months. Some might resist attributing this to alleged woke political messaging and too much Disney content, including Star Wars. Yet, while there are definitely other contributing factors, the company under its former CEO Bob Chapek did try to effect political change 3,000 miles from home in Florida, where Disney's theme park had enjoyed an unprecedented level of autonomy that has now been threatened by Governor DeSantis in retaliation for that attempted interference. Whether or not you think modern Star Wars is so bad and needs saved, I think that those in charge need to do something to embrace the oldest and most loyal audience instead of spouting hypocritical intentions about trying to change or supplant them because of their demographics. In trying to win over an audience or expand an existing one, you can't lead with political correctness or social representation because that's not what keeps audiences coming back. If it were, then every American film and television show would have been wildly successful because almost everything has had at least one straight white male in it. Nowadays, audiences are more savvy than ever when it comes to gauging a film or TV show's authenticity and that of its makers, whose enthusiasm or apathy for the material can be wonderfully and or painfully obvious. I think the best thing for Disney to do right now would be to wrap up whatever it is doing with Star Wars as quickly as possible before giving the franchise and audiences a few years to cool down. It would be consistent with Disney CEO Bob Iger's stated goals of focusing on quality over quantity. There also needs to be some acknowledgement and consideration for the fact that, unlike the stories and characters of major comic book companies like Marvel or DC, Star Wars was never meant to go on indefinitely. George Lucas had a big but singular story to tell about the Skywalker family and the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire, and for the most part, the merchandise that sprang up around the first six films stuck fairly close to that core story and those core characters. Now, I can't sit here and say for certain that a more vast Star Wars universe of cross-platform content can never work if not tethered to the Skywalkers and to Lucas's original vision. But where Marvel and DC fans flock to any number of different lead characters, pretty much every Star Wars fan became a fan by investing in a handful of characters and one story with one family at its center. The best conclusion I can come to is that Star Wars, like similar properties, suffers the most when it trades in broad allegory for more specific and timely social commentary. It isn't science fiction, it's global myth playing out in sci-fi trappings, distilled into an epic yet fundamentally simple story about a slave, a farm boy, a rogue, and a princess trying to defeat evil on a galactic scale. Oh, and a few droids too. Mostly, it's about good versus evil, the characters which generally have firm ideas about both. If that offends people like Kathleen Kennedy or Leslie Headland, then I suggest they reconsider whether or not they really want to spend their creative time in this galaxy far, far away. What do you think of this? Frankly, I'm out of things to say, but I thank you for watching. And if you like this series and other content, please like, subscribe, and spread the word. Thanks again, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.